My name is Zinta Conrad. I coordinate international education here at the college, and I am chair of the College Lecture Series Committee. I am delighted to welcome you this evening, and I'm so happy to see so many of you here. You are in truly for a treat this evening. Before I introduce you to tonight's speakers, I have a few announcements. The first one, obviously, guess what? Turn off your cell phones, please, and your pagers. No photography, especially no flash photography. There will be a book signing following the lecture out in the lobby, so we cordially invite you to purchase a copy of Ms. Thomas's latest book, and she has agreed to sign the books for you at that time. First, I want to thank the cast of thousands who made this program possible this evening. Stephen Cummins and the MAC administrative staff, fabulous, fabulous staff, couldn't do this without them, as well as the MAC technical crew led by John Gant. Follett's Bookstore, under the supervision of Jim Sexton, who also arranged for refreshments for you this evening, and the book signing following the lecture. Joanne Hill from the library, the College Lecture Series Committee, and last but not least, my staff in the International Education Office, Molly Manick, Alice Wiedevelt, and Ricardo Barral. We have had a slight change in the program. As you can tell, I'm not Steve Schroeder. Steve Schroeder was supposed to introduce our speaker, but unfortunately, he's in the dentist's chair as we speak, undergoing emergency root canal. So aren't you glad you're here and he's there? Steve was also going to lead the Q&A portion of our program, and that is going to be led by David Goldberg, who teaches political science here at the college. In coordination with tonight's lecture, a contest was held where students were asked to create a case study surrounding the impact of modern journalism on global issues. Tonight, I am pleased to introduce to you the winner, Jeremy Hanna. I hope Jeremy's in the audience. Jeremy, please come up on stage. He's a member. Jeremy Hanna is a member of our Honors Scholar program, and he created an extremely thought-provoking case study on the relationship between Islamic radicals and the global media. And if you're interested, have a chat with him after the program. His winning submission allowed him to not only join us here tonight, but he also shared dinner with Helen Thomas, our distinguished guest, earlier this evening. Jeremy, congratulations. Now, it is my very deep honor to introduce to you a true trailblazer, a reporter who has covered every president since John F. Kennedy, and a barrier breaker for women in the media. For 57 years, she served as White House correspondent for United Press International, UPI. During that time, she traveled around the world, several times in fact, with Presidents Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, and Clinton. She has also covered every economic summit during that time. In fact, she was the only woman print journalist to travel with then-President Nixon to China during his groundbreaking trip in January of 1972. Today, she serves as a syndicated columnist for Hearst newspapers. She's the author of several books, including her latest, Watchdogs of Democracy, The Waning Washington Press Corps, and How It Has Failed the Public. And she is still the senior ranking member of the White House Press Corps. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the First Lady of the Press, Helen Thomas.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you. It's always hard to hear your obituary. Good evening. I'm very honored to be here at this great school, which is preparing many students to be the leaders of tomorrow in the fields that they choose. There's no question they have their work cut out for them. We have started this 21st century with a war, and if the president would have it, it's a war without end. But I know the American people will not play that mindless game, and they will say enough is enough. It is wrong to ask the ultimate sacrifice of friends and foe without any good reason. And we have yet to hear that reason. Truth took a holiday in this war. President Bush struck a match across the Middle East, which has always been a tinderbox. He invaded Iraq under false pretenses, and we now occupy that destroyed country. And we are warning them, if they don't shape up, we might just pick up our marbles and go home. They should be so lucky. Who are we? Who are we? And what have we become? Whose war is this? Thousands are dead, thousands wounded, and to this day you cannot get a straight answer on why we attacked a third world country. We had a chokehold on Iraq. It couldn't make a move. We had the tightest economic sanctions, satellite surveillance, and we were bombing them every other night in the no-fly zone. 4 years of past history. Of course, terrorism has to be fought, and we are the target. But first we have to find out, what is it and why? What caused terrorism? Is it politics, religion, our foreign policy that has compelled this incredible hostility where it did not exist before? Why are we no longer the most admired country in the world to be emulated? This is the time to start thinking of peaceful solutions to set our world right again. We won the 60-year Cold War with the former Soviet Union, with exchange students, exchange teachers, the voice of America, the Pope, blue jeans, rap music. And when the Russian leader at the time, Mikhail Gorbachev, lifted the Iron Curtain a bit and let some of the democratic ideas come in, freedom, we found out, is really contagious. We kept our powder dry. You cannot shoot people in their own country to liberate them. They should be the Grateful Dead. As you can tell somehow, I'm against this invasion and occupation of Iraq. It is illegal, immoral, unconscionable, and shameful to wage a war. To wage a war against a country that did nothing to us. We're in the 5th year of this killing now, and we should have left yesterday. I'm sorry to be such a downer, but it's your world we're talking about. No man is an island. I decided to be a newspaper woman in high school. I saw my byline in the high school paper and my ego swelled. And I was hooked for life. I found out that I had chosen a career where I had to keep learning, that I couldn't miss a beat. I was told it was a career where you meet such interesting people, and that certainly is true. In fact, everyone is interesting to reporters. And we learn from everyone. I have been so fortunate to meet so many leaders who have run this country. Now, Illinois has 2 Democratic candidates for the presidency in this race. Senator Hillary Clinton, and Senator Barack Obama. And so far, all we've heard about is the obscene race for money. Is that what it's all about? Deep pocket donors, but not why they want to be president? And what will they do when they get to the White House? I'm glad we do have a serious woman candidate and a serious black contender for the first time in history for the presidency. The country is certainly ready for that. We have a woman Speaker of the House, a woman Secretary of State, such as she is. And yes, women have come a long way. Women ran space missions, they can do anything, as Amelia Earhart once said. Well, President Bush is becoming more and more isolated. He still speaks of victory, and as though anything else would be a personal defeat. His popularity polls are in the low 30s, almost hitting rock bottom for any president. And they're circling the wagons at the White House. They are under siege. This president has 2 years to go, and he has a right to worry about his legacy, if he does. The presidency is the top of the mark. Ain't no other place to go, and one should always want to do the right thing. But time is running out. And of course, the president is ignoring the will of the people to cut our losses. They're keeping up a charade at the White House that we were invited into Iraq. And I once said to a press officer, if they asked us to leave, would we leave? No way, Jose. But what is victory and what is defeat in Iraq? We might try to remember it's their country. There's no question that 9/11 has brought on a traumatic change in our country. For alleged security, we seem to be willing to forego our privacy and our great sense of justice. We have allowed ourselves to go to war based on untruths, no weapons of mass destruction, no ties to the Al-Qaeda terrorist network, no threat from a third world country. We have permitted ourselves to be wiretapped, our email pried into, our mail opened. We have tolerated torture of suspects and prisoners at Abu Ghraib and other prisons in Iraq, Guantanamo Bay. Humiliation of human beings, something that's not worthy of a great nation. The Democrats are chicken with their timetables and benchmarks, all designed to hold back the dawn. We allowed Congress to take away the ancient right of habeas corpus, the right of appeal for everyone. We pick up people, imprison them, never charge or try them. We keep them in limbo. We send them to secret prisons to be tortured under interrogation. Is this America? Yes, there will be mayhem if we get out. There is now, and we are exasperating the situation. We could be saving lives. We cannot justify what we're doing. I believe that the voters sent the president a message last November, a message, of course, they didn't want to hear and is still resisting. The president wants to pass this war on to his successor. He wants to run out the clock. There is, of course, the concern that we are baiting Iran into a war, not an invasion, but an air attack. We have 2 naval task forces in Iran's backyard, aircraft carriers, planes, submarines, missiles. But of course, in the last couple days, we have seen that even diplomacy works with Iran. It's a new ball game on Capitol Hill with the Democrats in charge, mostly in the House and by a very thin reed in the Senate. Nevertheless, it did break the Republican stronghold on our three branches of government. The Democrats are split between those who genuinely want to do something about the war and the super cautious, the so called moderates, who want to play it safe and wait until the next election. And that takes in Hillary Clinton and Obama. The sacking of 8 prosecutors, all Republican, gives us a different view of the public servant. To some, the rule of law beats loyalty to the party of the president. But in this case, this administration demands that all of its people walk in lockstep. The president has tried to politicize every government agency and stack it with his cronies and party loyalists. There is undecidedly there is a civil service undercutting of the civil service and tremendous war profiteering going on that is sanctioned. The last I looked, the Washington Monument was still in federal hands. On another note, we are spending our national treasury on war, while 48 million people have no health insurance. Children in this country go to school without breakfast. Schools are falling apart. Government programs to alleviate the suffering are being cut. The biggest tax cuts go to the richest people in this country. Surely something is wrong with this picture. We have a shameful minimum wage of $5.15 an hour. Something is being done about that if small business gets a tax break. Big auto companies are in big trouble, and it will take years for a true accounting of war profiteering. We have 100,000 contractors, private contractors in Iraq. Many have paid the price with their lives. It's Russian roulette on the streets of Baghdad. As for the press, the book I wrote, Watchdogs of Democracy, is very critical of my colleagues for what I believe letting the country down. Our one weapon is skepticism. And when reporters don't ask the president the key questions, they don't get asked. We are the only institution in our society that can question a president on a regular basis and hold him accountable. And when we default on that, we do let the people down. After 9/11, reporters were afraid to rock the boat, afraid to be called unpatriotic, un-American. They are now coming out of their coma, finally, and they're much more hard driving. They saw the flaws in the handling of Katrina, which is still a debacle. This great country can do anything, and it has fallen down on the job in restoring the whole Gulf Coast, New Orleans. Justice Hugo Black once said, quote, "Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government, and paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people." I came to Washington in a different era, when government was actually respected. Liberals were not demonized. We had a caring society, a society trying to make up for the sins of the past, to help the poor, the sick, the maimed, to try to tear down the racial and ethnic barriers that made so many second-class citizens. It was a hopeful time, last half of the 20th century. The idealists were legion. They overcame the hardships of the Great Depression, World War II. They were believers in people. We had nothing to fear but fear itself. It was an era that personified Lincoln's philosophy that government should do for people what they cannot do for themselves. I came to Washington, as I say, determined to be a reporter. And my friend Liz Carpenter came about the same time. She had just graduated from the University of Texas, and we went knocking on doors at the National Press Building. And Liz was always on the plump side in that era. Well, who wasn't? And she ran out of money a couple of days before I did, and she wired her brother, "Please send me $200 or I'm going to have to sell my body." He wired back, "Sell it by the pound." But he sent the money. He sent the money. I got my big break as a copy boy on the now defunct Washington Daily News for the wonderful salary of $17.50 a week. Those were the good old days. I thought I'd give you my take on the presidents I've covered. All well-intentioned, I presume, but something happens on the way to the forum. John F. Kennedy, the most inspired. He created the Peace Corps. He signed the first nuclear test ban treaty. He urged young people to go into public service, telling them that it could be the crown of their careers. He said, "We're going to land men on the moon in a decade." He didn't live to see it, but we did it. And during his first year in office at the White House, he had a small supper party for the first class of the astronauts and their wives. And during the mix and mingle, he said to them, do you think we could land on the moon?" And they said, "Sure, absolutely. You never say no to a president." When they left us, they said, "Is this guy nuts? Is he crazy? Land on the moon?" Much was made of the fact when he ran that he was a Roman Catholic. That was in 1960, and his Republican opponent, was Richard Nixon. And during that campaign, Kennedy faced many rumors that he would be taking orders from the Pope if he became president. Well, to meet that problem, he flew to Houston at the Presbyterian Ministers' Convention, and he told the ministers that the Vatican would not be running the country if he became president. But he really won them over when he told them, "When my brother Joe got into his plane during World War II for his fatal trip across the English Channel, no one asked him if he was a Catholic or a Protestant." And when his son John was born, I remember asking Kennedy if he wanted him to grow also to be president. He said, "I just want him to be healthy." Kennedy used to tell us, there's a universe out there that we have to explore. And then there was Lyndon B. Johnson, bigger than life. He had to have it all. He monogrammed our society, LBJ. But after FDR, he certainly made the greatest contribution to our country domestically in the last half of the 20th century. In his first 2 years in office, on the tailwind of the Kennedy assassination, he rammed through Medicare, which Truman first proposed, couldn't get through, the Civil Rights Act, voting rights for blacks for the first time in the South, public housing, federal aid to education at all levels, from Head Start through college, environmental laws, national parks, you name it. Well, shortly after Johnson became president, a group of his Southern cronies came to the Oval Office and said, "What is this, Lyndon? When you were in the Senate, when you were Senate Majority Leader, you were one of us. You were a Southerner." He said, "I'm president now, president of all the people." The Vietnam War, of course, was his undoing. But he promoted education in every way, and he said it was a passport to a better life. Richard Nixon always had two roads to go, and he always took the wrong road. He did make the breakthrough trip to China. He worked for détente, my nasal drip here. He worked for détente with the Soviet Union. and he said he had a plan to end the Vietnam War. 4.5 years later, we were still bombing Hanoi. He was politically astute. I guarantee you, if he were standing here today, he could tell you who would be the next president in 2008. He was that good at it. Prognostication. But of course, the Watergate scandal was his denouement, and he did become the first president in American history to be forced to resign from office. The late Gerald Ford, on taking office, told us after Watergate that the long national nightmare was over. He restored confidence in the Oval Office, and he stabilized the country in the aftermath of the scandal. But he pardoned Richard Nixon, and that did not sit well with the voters, and he didn't win the election on his own, election to the presidency on his own. Jimmy Carter put human rights as a centerpiece of his foreign policy. He has won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he is in demand all over the world to settle disputes. Both sides want him. Both sides know that he will be fair. He's an outstanding past president. Ronald Reagan turned the country to the right. There was a Reagan revolution in our country. And during his tenure, however, more than 100 officials were forced to resign or fired for wrongdoing. He did raise the stakes with the arms race with the Soviet Union, and it was very helpful, probably the straw that broke the camel's back in the Cold War. And he used to say that government was the problem, not the solution. It was very hard to believe that he had been 6 times head of the Screen Actors Guild, and he was the first president to try to break organized labor and unions in this country. George Herbert Bush, 41, conducted successful Gulf War, and after the liberation of Kuwait, he wisely decided not to go to Baghdad, where he said there would be house-to-house fighting and a civil war. Imagine that. He failed to win re-election because of the depressed economy. As for Iraq, he's been there, done that, and his son says he listens to a higher father. Bill Clinton, charismatic politician, won the presidency twice, but he didn't understand that his opponents had denied him any legitimacy from the moment he took office. He never knew a second in the White House when he was not being investigated by the Republicans. He worked for peace in Northern Ireland, the Balkans, Middle East. He left a big surplus in the Treasury when he left office, which has now been dissipated by the war. He missed his chance for greatness because of his liaison with an intern. He won't be on Mount Rushmore. George Bush, 42. Simple philosophy, black and white, with us or against us, dead or alive. He's a conservative all the way. He tore down the wall of separation of church and state, setting up a religious office in the White House for the first time in history. He wanted to be known as a wartime president. He is. No president has ever liked the press, dating back to George Washington. I wasn't covering him, but Kennedy said, "I'm reading more and enjoying it less." What LBJ said is unprintable. He also used to grumble to us, "You all have the First Amendment," as though it were some special weapon against presidents. Matter of fact, it is. Nixon once looked up when we poured into the cabinet room for a picture taking, and he said, "It's only coincidental that we're talking about pollution when the press walks in." President Ford likened my questions to acupuncture. And he said that if God had created the world in 6 days, on the 7th day, he could not have rested. He would have had to explain it to Helen Thomas. And I hope I would have been asking God why. When President Reagan was told that the Sandinistas, the Marxists, had fired on a press helicopter at the Honduran border, he said, "There's some good in everyone." And when President Clinton was asked by a friend why the press always went along in the motorcade when he went jogging, he laughed and said, "They just want to see if I drop dead." That's true. We're on a body watch. And when Al Newhart, the founder of USA Today, went to Havana a couple of years ago, he asked Fidel Castro, "Now, what's the difference between your democracy and ours?" Castro said, "I don't have to answer questions from Helen Thomas." I have many memories in covering the White House. I remember Kennedy's off-the-cuff remark at a news conference. He said, "Life is unfair." And like most presidents, LBJ had a stable of speechwriters. And once he asked that a certain speech be prepared, speechwriter brought him the first draft. He looked at it and said, "Voltaire, Voltaire. People I'm going to talk to don't know who Voltaire is." Grabbed a pen, scratched out Voltaire, and scribbled in, "As my dear old daddy used to say." We were often invited to the LBJ Ranch for dinner. And once Johnson asked Bill Moyers, who had been a Baptist minister, was then his press secretary, to say grace. Moyers bent his head, began to pray. Johnson commanded, "Speak up, Bill." "I wasn't talking to you, Mr. President," Moyers replied. And when LBJ was taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital just outside of Washington for gallbladder surgery, the psychiatric ward had been transformed into a press room. What happened to the patients?" Johnson asked Moyers. "We gave them all press cards," said Moyers. And then there was my favorite, Midge Costanza, who was in charge of women's affairs at the Carter White House. She said, "I don't mind Carter being born again, but did he have to come back as himself?" And I remember asking Billy Carter, his brother, if he too had been born again. He said, "Once is enough." And then there was my favorite, Miss Lillian, Carter's mother, who said, "Sometimes when I look at my children, I wish I'd remained a virgin." When Carter won the presidential election, a reporter ran up to Miss Lillian and said, "Aren't you proud of your son?" She said, "Which one?" And I remember interviewing her in Plains, Georgia, in 1976. She was still fuming over a French woman correspondent who had belabored Carter's campaign promise, never to lie. Kept asking Miss Lillian, what did he really mean by that? Then finally she said to Miss Lillian, do you lie? Miss Lillian said, "Well, might tell a little white lie." "Well, what do you mean by a little white lie?" In total exasperation, Miss Lillian said, "Do you remember when you came through that door and I told you how beautiful you looked?" Well, that's a little white lie. And then there was Henry Kissinger, the man with an enormous ego. A woman ran up to Kissinger and said, "Oh, Dr. Kissinger, thank you for saving the world." He said, "You're welcome." Adlai Stevenson said, "Democracy is great, not only because the majority prevails, but because it's safe to be in the minority." Winston Churchill said, "Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others that have been invented." After the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Kennedy and Khrushchev went toe-to-toe and each stepped back from the brink, each was a statesman, each had nuclear arsenals they knew could blow up the world, they cared more about humanity. They stepped back. Kennedy told the students at American University after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he said, America would never start a war. Our generation has had enough of hate and war. We want a world where the weak are secure and the strong are just." The Reverend William Sloane Coffin, a civil rights activist and anti-Vietnam War leader, who died several months ago, before he died, said, quote, "The war against Iraq is as disastrous as it is unnecessary, perhaps in terms of its wisdom, purpose, motives, the worst war in American history. Our military men and women were not called to defend America, but rather to attack Iraq. They were not called to die for their country, but rather to kill for their country. What more unpatriotic thing could we have asked of our sons and daughters?" Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Justice Brandeis said, "A constant spotlight on public officials lessens the possibility of corruption." Lincoln said, "Let the people know the facts, and the country will be safe." I believe that. At the end of World War II, President Truman sent Justice Robert Jackson to Nuremberg to be our chief prosecutor at the Nazi war crimes trials. Nazi generals told Jackson, "We're on trial because we lost the war." He said, "No, you're on trial because you started a war." During Martin Luther King's March on Washington, we all remember his immortal speech, "I have a dream." But I remember even more the rabbi who had been in a Nazi concentration camp for many years, and he said, "The greatest sin of all in the Nazi era was silence." So ask not for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for all of us. Let's give peace a chance, and let it begin with us. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there a microphone here?
Thank you. Thank you. I'll be happy. Thank you. I'll be happy, I think, to take your questions.
I'd like to thank Ms. Thomas for helping us speak truth to power with grace and humor. I think that's especially pertinent at this time in our nation's history. So I'd like to open the floor for questions. And what I'd ask is that there are 4 microphones
here.
on stage left and right, in the balcony and here on the main floor, and that you approach in a line to ask questions, and that you phrase your comments in the form of a question rather than a statement for the purposes of parsimony and time. And when we're done with questions, as Zinta stated, Ms. Thomas will sign her book in the lobby, and we would like to again thank Follett's for the refreshments as well. So please, let's open the floor to questions.
I think she's this lady.
What was your most memorable moment?
You have to be on the microphone in order to ask the question.
If you had the power to change both the way TV news is presented as well as political ads, what would you do?
If you had the chance to change television and media, what would you do?
Especially with political ads.
Especially with political ads, what would you focus on changing
In television?
in the media?
Well, I'd get away from the sound bites. At first place, I'd let all the candidates go on the air without having to have billions of dollars. I do think, you know, the airwaves belong to the American people, and yet you wouldn't know that. This obscene fundraising and so forth, which will all go to the networks, I would change that first place. I would go back to the fairness doctrine, and so forth. I think that we've really gotten too far away from that, and I think there's a lot to be done about television. I think that they are trying to inform us, but they also more want to amuse us, and they think They're dumbing us down.
How did it come about that you were the journalist who got the first question at the press briefings? How did that happen?
The question was, how did it come about that you were the journalist who was lucky enough to get the first question at all press briefings?
Well, when I worked for UPI, there was a tradition at the White House, which is that the wire services, UPI and AP, would get the first two questions, and we would rotate. I no longer work for UPI, so I certainly don't deserve the first question. It's a tradition that I think is good. Right now, I think the president comes in with this little list of people he's going to call on, but he does religiously call on the wire services and TV correspondents, which is fine. So I was very lucky. I didn't have to scream like a banshee and so forth to get his attention. I had the privilege often of asking the first or second question.
Thank you.
What will it take to impeach the president?
The question was, what would it take to impeach the president?
The will of the people, the will of Congress, and I don't think you have that will there. Although I think how many towns in Vermont have decided that you just go that way? I can't see that happening, but there is a movement here and there. Nancy Pelosi took it off the table as even an option. So.
Helen, you mentioned that during the JFK presidency, we were a caring society. You also mentioned we had a hopeful nation. Who was your favorite president, and do you see anybody since JFK, let's take Barack Obama, giving us that hope again?
The question was, who's your favorite president, and what candidates do you see in the future that might fulfill that kind of greatness?
Well, Kennedy was my favorite. I think it becomes quite obvious. I think he gave us hope. I think he was truly inspired after World War II. I think this is very subjective analysis but I honestly believe he knew his time was short, and I think you live in a different way. But he also had a tremendous intellect and intellectual curiosity, and I think that he definitely wanted to pursue a world of peace. He also knew there was a universe out there that we should explore. There are so many answers we don't have. He gave us hope, and I really honestly believe we lost that when he died, because every other president I covered is very pragmatic. Has been.
Are there any candidates that you see on the horizon today that have that sort of potential?
Not yet. I do think they have the potentiality, but you have to have courage. You have to be a profile in courage, and you have to believe that people want to be the same thing. And I think there isn't enough faith in the American people for these candidates to take the chance and put everything on the line.
Throughout all of your years, what is the most memorable moment you had?
Throughout all of your years, what was the most memorable moment that you had?
Well, that's kind of hard to say, because I suppose from a reporter's standpoint, going to China in 1972, after we had no relations with China for 20 years between the U.S. and China. So it was really like landing on the moon. Everything we had learned about China was absolutely wrong. There was a whole transformation into a communist society, so that every reporter in Washington wanted to be on that trip. Everything we saw, everything we felt, everything we ate was a story. And I never had experienced anything like that, where we really felt the world was waiting for everything that we wrote and so forth. And I think that it was a tremendous breakthrough, and it just well, we've seen what's happened to China now. It's going to beat us in 10 years on everything. And we took the first satellites there. We really, I was surprised the telephones actually worked when we got there and so forth. But no, they're making great strides, and it was a whole new world. They had had to limit the press corps in going because they wanted to put a spy interpreter on every 2 reporters. So we.
Here in the balcony on stage right.
There we go. Yeah, so question where the answer is going to be for the student journalists in the audience. What recommendations do you have for these student journalists on being the watchdog of the institution that they're a part of?
The question is, what advice would you have for student journalists in terms of being vigilant as a watchdog of an institution in which they participate?
Go for it. Our greatest goal, and we think our holy grail, is the search for truth. I mean, we put it on that high-flown basis, but I really believe that's true. And I honestly believe that when the reporters fall down on the job, they let the country down. And they should never cower before public officials. We pay the president. He is our servant. I tell every press secretary, I pay you. If the president wants a plaque, let him pay you, and so forth. It goes on like that. Well, we have to take a stand. We don't have a king. We don't have a dictator. No man is above the law in this country. And so I think that the reporters should have courage. They also should know the price. There is a price to be paid if your corporate heads in New York don't like what you say and don't like your style. And I do think that in many ways they forced them, the corporate heads did force correspondents to pull in their horns during that whole period. Now I think, and during Katrina, they said, have at it. You can question the administration now. But there's no question the press played ball, and I think that journalism is the greatest profession because you always have to keep learning. It's an education every day. And there's very few, I think, professions that give you that same sense. Also, where you always want to go to work because you don't want to miss anything. So I've been very lucky in that respect. I'd rather be a reporter.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming this evening to speak to us. And now if you can think back on all of the press briefings that you had at the White House, what's the one question that you are most proud for having asked?
The question was, of all the questions that you've asked, what is the one of which you are the most proud?
Why did we go to war? I mean, the president, I think he was trying to be nice to me, and he thought we had smoked the peace pipe. And then, so he gave me, after 3 years of not calling on me, he called on me, and I said, "You'll be sorry." So,
And he was.
I think you have one chance in the barrel, so go for it.
During your time as press secretary, has United States foreign policy been to truly spread democracy, establish hegemonic influence, or build and rule an empire?
The question is, during the time that you've been a journalist, has the intent of U.S. foreign policy to become a hegemonic power and an empire, or to spread democracy?
Certainly this administration has a unilateral foreign policy. After World War II, we believed in collective security. We signed one treaty after another saying this is one world and we're all in it together. We are our brother's keeper in every sense of the word. So all the treaties, the Geneva Conventions on human rights, which had practically been torn up, non-proliferation and so forth. And it's true that many countries don't want inspection of their nuclear facilities. Well, we don't either. We would never allow an inspector in our country. We keep giving orders to the rest of the world. We are following, or the president is following, I think, a very destructive foreign policy which was constructed by the neoconservatives, which is that we are the military superpower, the only military superpower in the world. Therefore, we can give orders to the rest of the world. And that's the whole neocon agenda. It's called Project for a New American Century. It says, first we take Iraq, then Syria, then Iran, then Saudi, then Somalia, then Sudan, Egypt. You'll have the whole Middle East, and you can have permanent bases and so forth. But we've been cut off at the pass 4 years into this war, and it's Russian roulette.
Here.
It's really nice to hear you, Ms. Thomas. You ask a question as a good reporter, why did we go to war? I'm asking, is it because of the money and the oil? Or is it because crusade war? Or is it to take direct the attention to Iraq instead to Israel and Palestine?
The question is, was, in your estimation, the justification of war for money and oil, or to distract attention from the situation with the Israelis and the Palestinians?
I don't think it's to distract the attention. In fact, I think, if anything, that problem is there. It's been there since 1948. And if anything, there isn't one Arab in the Middle East who isn't aware of this problem. We see that every night on Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, and so forth. These sees. And it's a festering problem. But that isn't why President Bush went in. I think there were many, many reasons. I think oil was one of them. If I went through this auditorium and I asked, why are we there? I'll bet I'd give at least 5 or 6 different answers. And that's no way to go to war. There should be one reason. I must say that I was really shocked when several months ago I was doing a column, and I talked to Senator Kerry about his peace plans, but he was not the chief focus. But I said to him, I said, why do you think we went to war? And he gave me an answer that I thought, no, I mean, this can never be. He said, I don't want to speculate. 4 years in a war, and you don't want to speculate on why we're there, killing and being killed? I was shocked. We ought to know why we're there. And I think the reason you don't get it from the president is because whatever the reason, it's not acceptable. If it was, it would state it and we would know it. You have one reason under international law to go to war: when you are attacked, or if you have a treaty with the country that is attacked and you've promised to go to their aid. That's it.
Up here in the balcony.
Helen, I question the need and the...
Can you speak up, please?
Yes. I question the need for Nancy Pelosi's trip to the Middle East, and I'd like your comments on what your feeling is about that.
The question is, the questioner was skeptical about Speaker Pelosi's recent trip to the Middle East, and he wanted to know what your impressions of that are.
Why are you skeptical?
Well...
I mean, isn't it better to talk than to kill everybody? Look, are the British wise?
No, I agree.
Wiser than us that they go talk to Tehran?
No, I agree.
We talked to the Soviet Union for 60 years.
Right.
They had a total dictatorship. Total.
Yes.
We've talked to dictators all the time. It was okay for Nancy Pelosi, to go to Israel, but not to Syria. Why?
Well, because of our relationship there.
I'll pretend that was a rhetorical question. If you have a follow-up question.
That's all right.
that
He
you
answered,
can-
he answered right.
Okay. No, I just question
It's-
whether she's the appropriate person to go over there and talk with a nation that
Listen,
we
if you went
don't
over
have-
there and could make peace, I would like it.
Okay.
We have seen that we have a government that will not move. What is this?
Thank you.
You don't talk to anyone? You have to. Even in the worst bargaining strikes that we've seen in this country, where it's in the total hostility, you have to talk to each other.
Ms. Thomas, thank you for coming to share with us at COD tonight. As a journalism student, my question goes to fairness in journalism. You've restored my faith that there is one journalist that is fair.
I don't know if I'm fair, but
well, with what you said
Thank you.
tonight, but my question goes this way. In today's media and the CNNs and the Foxes of the world, we see such a right or such a left. Where can media go, or how can we get media to tell the people what they need to hear so that the people can make their own decision instead of making the decision for them?
The question is, in light of ideological nature of the media, what can be done to help the media to do a better job of informing citizens rather than pushing advocacy journalism?
well, my answer is, I think most preferable is, for 57 years, I wrote for a wire service. We had to stick just the facts, ma'am. If your mother told you she loved you, check it out. I mean, this was the kind where you were stuck with the facts, and you were not allowed to slant anything or put your own bias in. I think the American people are best served, all the people are best served with just the facts. There's no question about it. And, but that doesn't mean I bowed out of the human race when I was a reporter. I really was skits. I separated my own feelings, and I permitted myself to care, to believe, to think, but I didn't get in my copy. I tried to write the story as straight and as fairly as possible. Now I write a column, an opinion column. And when I first started writing the column, the editor looked at it and said, "Where's the edge?" I said, "The what?" "Your opinion." "My what?" And so now I wake up in the morning and say, "Who do I hate today?" Because if you have, I mean, you can hardly like anything. It's just, in a column, you have to, no, I'm teasing, I think.
Here.
An important political issue in this time in the United States is immigration. How do you feel about it?
The question is, what do you think about immigration reform in the country at this time?
Well, we used to say to my dad, "We're glad he didn't miss the boat." I think that it's a very, very tough problem, but I honestly believe that we should be much more open with the immigrants and so forth. We need them. They're American, and it's very, I mean, I know it's a tough problem on the borders and so forth, but I would like to see a much more open society. At the same time, I went to Mexico for summit meetings about 3 times with 3 different presidents. Immigration was always on the agenda between the 2 presidents, President of Mexico, President of the United States. The touchiest subject of all, as you can imagine, and usually on the last day, in the last hours of the summit meetings, they would finally take up immigration. And the Mexican president always told the American president, "That's your problem." We have been a safety valve, no question about it. But I think there is a fair solution, and I don't want to throw anybody out.
Here.
I was wondering if the current media is satisfied with the embedded media program with the war of Iraq and Afghanistan.
The question is, what do the media think about the embedded program that the Pentagon has used in the recent war?
Well, the ones I talked to thought it was, they liked it, of course, because it was very protective of them. And so they thought it did well, but we all know they only saw a slice of the war. And they certainly, you did not see the war as it really was. They liked it because they stayed alive, and the same way with the Green Zone. It's a very, very difficult war to cover because it's really not a war in the sense that we've known wars in the past. So I don't blame them, but at the same time, I think they missed a lot in terms of the horror of war, the bloodshed, and so forth. The fact that no coffins are shown, no wounded are shown, and so forth. The Walter Reed Hospital has been there about 150 years, and suddenly the Washington Post discovered it. I mean, give me a break. And that goes for all the reporters. They pulled their punches. They shouldn't have. They should have been outside of Dover, the mortuary in Delaware, counting the planes coming in at midnight. Bringing in the coffins, bringing in the wounded. And these aren't ordinary wounds. This isn't shrapnel in your shoulder. These are wounds for a lifetime.
Here in the balcony.
Yes, I believe you are a national treasure, Ms. Thomas. I just want to
Said
say
you are
that.
a national treasure.
And my question is, why do you
if
feel...
you only knew. Thanks.
And my question is, why do you think today's reporters seem almost afraid to ask the president the tough questions? And were you forced out of the White House because you asked these kind of questions? Or why did you leave? Are you still there?
The question is, why does it seem that reporters today are more reluctant to ask the White House tough questions, and how has that influenced you recently in terms of pressure on you?
On me, I walk in where angels fear to tread. I mean, what am I supposed to be afraid of at this stage of the game? I think that reporters, like members of Congress, we're all afraid to rock the boat. I really do think that the climate of 9/11, which was constantly being thrown out, that there was a fear that they were being considered un-American, unpatriotic. I never had that feeling. I think it's unpatriotic not to ask the questions. I think the most important question, I want it on my epitaph, why? I mean, why? It seems to me when you ask people to give their lives, you should have a good reason. And people should certainly know what the reason is. I remember in Vietnam, I mean, people went to war. I spoke once at West Point after the Vietnam War was over, and I remembered the cadets, I spoke to the cadets, and one woman in uniform got up and said, "Why do we have to know that?" I said, "Don't you want to know why you're there? Why you're being asked to kill? You're raised not to kill. You're raised not to cheat, not to do this. And all of a sudden you're sent 6,000 miles away to kill. Don't you want to know why?" I know how that sounds so emotional, which it is. But what else can it be? Oh, I was going to say that, the man who broke recently with, who was one of President Bush's mentors, political advisors, has now broken with him because his son is going to, and the White House says he's so emotional. Your son is going to be deployed in a war, and you're so emotional. Gee.
Here in the corner.
Thank you for your insights, Ms. Thompson. I agree with you. Maybe our prestige is not in the world today what it was at one time. A lot of people will trace that back to a gentleman by the name of Joseph McCarthy. If that be the case, do you think the press has any regrets for giving him the platform they did?
The question is, does the press have any regrets for providing Joseph McCarthy with the platform to launch the Red Scare?
I think, you know, when you're a senator and you open your mouth, and it goes for a president too, you can't ignore what they say. It's no question about it. There probably should have been further probing on what he said, but they have to report it. That's the role of the press. If he says it out loud, and he is a senator, and he is a president, quote unquote. But you're right to the extent that so many people suffered under that terrible tyranny, and there certainly should have been more checked out on him. But in the end, no, there's something about a democracy that really works. Takes time, but eventually he was found out, and he died a very sad man and a lonely man. But he had hurt a lot of people, I'll grant you that.
Did you have a follow-up question?
May I?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when he showed up in Ohio.
Can you speak in the
and had
microphone?
that list, he said of 250 communists. Do you feel the press should have done a better job of saying who are those 250 rather than just pass it on as is?
The question was, when he came to Ohio with a list of 250 names, should the press have been harder in terms of asking who those names were?
Well, I think that, sure, there was a lot of phony stuff like, you don't get all those chances. They often hit and run, they don't stand around, and no, there mistakes were made on all times, but we would never think of shutting up a senator, especially if he's attacking something and you don't have any proof otherwise. We could all do a better job of reporting, no question about it, but you're really under a time strain, lots of pressure and so forth. Now, I mean, in the good old days, we used to have to run 2 blocks to try to get to a phone, pay someone to hold the phone open for us. Now, reporters have the cell phones, they have the laptops. Everybody with a laptop thinks they're journalists. This is the most frightening thing of all. No, everybody can always do a better job. We can always Monday morning quarterback. There isn't a time, I don't think, that any reporter ever does a story, but what they know, they should have asked a different question, or they should have done more research and so forth. You don't always have that time. Opportunity.
Right here.
Okay. You mentioned the role of the press in bringing to light accountability of government actions. Yet there's one branch of our government, the judicial branch, that functions pretty much out of the glare of the TV cameras. What's your opinion on allowing TV cameras into our courts, especially our highest court?
The question is, what do you think about having more of a media presence on the judicial branch, and more specifically allowing TV cameras in the Supreme Court?
I would love it. I want to know how in the hell they made such dumb decisions. You never get an explanation. It's so maddening. They get by with anything. No, I'd love to see that. But I don't think it's going to happen soon. I think it would be great.
Here in the balcony.
In school, I was taught about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness all throughout my lifetime. I've learned all of this stuff. I've learned about civil liberties. I've learned about the great civil rights movement of the 1960s. I lived through all of that stuff. And we were very, very critical of the Germans back at the time of Hitler for being silent. Now I see the exact same thing happening in this country. Where's the outrage over what's going on in Iraq, what's going on with the economy, gasoline prices, a whole bunch of things? Where is the outrage?
The question is, where is the outrage regarding foreign policy, economic policy, and domestic policy, given the values that the United States represents with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that we're all socialized into believing?
You tell me. I agree with you. I think we have a very passive society. I think that people are not touched by this war because there's no draft, and I don't want a draft. I do think that it's somebody else's war. It is a voluntary army. Some of them have been deployed 2 and 3 times. and so forth. So I think it just hasn't hit the general population. When you read a story about Iraq, it's all numbers. It isn't even human. So I agree. I wish there was outrage. If there was, the president would know that he can keep sticking to his stubborn positions.
Here in the balcony?
Ms. Thomas, I just had a question about if you have an opinion of the noticeable increase in comedians delivering the news in today's
I can't
media.
understand you. Can you rephrase the question?
Do you have an opinion on the noticeable increase of comedians to deliver today's news and ask the hard-hitting questions?
The question is, what do you think about comedians that are delivering the news as journalists?
I love them. I think they're telling us the truth. And I want to commend all the comic strips to everyone. If you want to get the news, read the comics, read the funnies. Good.
Here.
On the subject of reporters not asking the hard questions, it sometimes seems that presidential press conferences, that they're scripted, or that the president knows exactly what's coming and in what order. Does this administration run their press conferences in a way different from previous administrations? Are there controls that they use that weren't used before?
The question is regarding how scripted White House press conferences are, and how is this administration similar or different than the predecessors?
Reporters don't submit the questions in advance, but we're very predictable. I think they know very well that we're going to go for the headlines of the day, especially if you work for a wire service and so forth. What is different is this president does come in with a little list. He has a little list that will never be missed, and it's obviously prepared by his people of who to call on. And it doesn't mean that these people are necessarily safe, but they are the ones that he calls on. That's different. That isn't always done. Used to be kind of a free-for-all, except for the wire services being privileged to ask the first two questions. So I think that this president also won't take a follow-up. So he can say the most outrageous things, and you say, why? Or what? But he won't take the question. For example, he said to me once, I said, you know, when you came into office, you wanted this war. He said, Helen, no president ever wants a war. And I wanted to say, you do, but I couldn't say it because he kept cutting me off. Don't interrupt me.
Right here.
Which reporters today do you admire in particular, and why?
Which reporters today do you admire the most, and why?
All of them. You're going to put me on a spot like that? I honestly think that all the reporters try to do the best they can, and they are trying to do a good job. But there is so much spin at the White House. There's so much manipulation of the facts. They all want to put their best foot forward when they're at the press podium. Toughest job, I think, in the White House, second toughest job, is press secretary. You really have to wear two hats if you're a good one. I mean, first place, you speak for the President of the United States. You speak for the whole federal government. You speak for the American people. That's one hat. And then you have to speak to the press, and you're supposed to level with them and tell them the truth. So it takes a real schizophrenic to do the job. But most press secretaries in recent times have simply been advocates, so they don't have that problem of a split personality. They really do see themselves as promoting the agenda of the president, whatever it is. And sometimes they get a little embarrassed by it.
Here in the balcony.
Ms. Thomas, earlier you were asked about the question you were most proud of during 57 years. It seems like we shouldn't let you out of the room until someone asks you the one you wish you could take back or you wish you had asked.
The question was, you spoke of the questions you're glad you asked. Which question do you wish you had back?
None. The only questions you only ask is you wish you had toughened them up or asked in a different way that could have evoked a better answer or more honest answer. But no, I don't regret any questions. I just regret the lack of opportunity to ask the question. And I think that that's our only sign of democracy. We don't have a British system, as I say, where the Prime Minister goes before the House of Commons, really grilled by the back bench and so forth. So we're the last line. We're the only institution in our society that can question a president. And he should be questioned early and often.
Here in the balcony.
Yes, Ms. Thomas, I would just love to hear you make any comments you'd like about Molly Ivins.
I loved her. I thought she was a great newspaper woman, probably the best who ever knew George Bush and what makes him tick. I think she truly was the national treasurer. And I mean, her loss will be felt, really. She understood Texas. She understood how it produced such people.
Here in the corner.
She was a friend, great lady.
Yes, Ms. Helen, I just want to know, what is your thought on the surge of the troops that General Petraeus is asking for now, when the prior generals told them that they were going to need more troops if they invaded Iraq?
What do you think about the recent surge, given the fact that there was some division among senior military in terms of the number of troops that would be necessary to go in the initial invasion?
Surge is a euphemism for escalating the war. It's Custer's last stand. It's the president thinking, if you can put more people on every street in Baghdad, then you can subdue and pacify the people. You can for a while, you can shoot a lot of people, but that's not going to win this war. They also have a way of saying, well, this General Petraeus, he's in charge. Well, he's not in charge. The White House is in charge of this war, and it's the president's last effort, I think, to roll the dice.
Here in the corner.
As I look at your book title, you say that the Washington press corps is waning and it's failed the public. Do you think they've reached a point of no return? Will the press corps and just the larger media be able to come back from this very low point in its history?
Do you think that the press corps will be able to revitalize itself given the pessimistic outlook that you've expressed in the book?
Oh, absolutely. I think they have. I think they've come back a lot now. I think they've been given a new lease on life. I think one of the great tragedies now is, in terms of the press, is that we've become a country of one newspaper towns. And that's very sad, because competition used to be our lifeblood. There's so much going on in Chicago and LA and so forth. Once upon a time, newspapers were owned by families, and the publisher, man or woman, would make their money in real estate or business or whatever. The newspaper was their contribution to the community. Now they've grown so much and they've gone public. Wall Street demands that they make 25%, 30% profit. It's not the same, and a lot of them have been put out of business. It's very, very sad. So I think that definitely reporters will wake up, and they are waking up. They're asking tougher questions now. And I think, I don't know if they realize, but I think Congress too. I mean, they rolled over, played dead, when they should have been really questioning and so forth. Now all of them are scrambling to act like they didn't support the war. And they're in a dilemma as to whether to continue to support funding. Well, they can support funding, enough in the pipeline to bring them home.
I'd like to follow up and ask if you have any insights into the recent sale of the Tribune properties here in Chicago and the implication of that based on what you've said.
Well, I always am unhappy when papers are being sold because I don't know what's going to happen, but I want it to survive, so whatever keeps it alive, the whole thing.
Here in the balcony?
Hello. I think it's not working that the government is not working for the people, as I can see that most of the Americans are not happy with the war in Iraq. So as you and the media are doing good job in conveying the message, but what different can we do so that the government is working for the people and not for something else?
What can citizens do to ensure that the government works for the interests of the people as opposed to some other actors? What can citizens do to ensure that the government works to work on behalf of citizens as opposed to other interests?
I do think that the press can certainly watch that, and I think the press is very important role to play in that respect, of really watching government in operation. And I was at National Airport today and having a coffee and a cinnamon bun or something, and a man sat down, and he turned out to be the former FBI director, William Sessions, and all of them joined law firms now. They're all, I don't know what he's lobbying. But I said, well, what about public servants now? And they really are under the gun, and they're being very politicized and so forth. He said that during his confirmation hearing, Senator Biden told him, if the White House calls you, your antenna should go up. I mean, how much are they under control? These people take an oath to uphold the Constitution, uphold the laws of this land, and I think that should be their first order of business and should never submit to this. The kind of, it's very, very difficult, children to raise, kids to put through college and so forth. It's not easy to be a whistleblower or a leaker and so forth, but they serve best. I love leakers and whistleblowers because they tell you the truth.
In the interest of time, I think I'm going to ask that we go around the room one more time. Here.
Hi, Ms. Thomas. I just wanted to say thank you for coming. And I was wondering, what's your opinion on the removal of Saddam from his position and the addition of the new Iraqi government?
Well, I think that, first place, we had no right to be in Iraq. And I think that if Saddam was to be removed, it should have been removed by his own people. That's the way most revolutions are. It hasn't changed the picture really much. Of course, he was a very bad man, a tyrant, and so forth. But I can name you 12 in this world, practically, dictators and so forth. What was the last half of the question?
After the removal of Saddam, the new government, what do you think of the new government?
I think they're in. I think it's ironical that we put this puppet government in place, and we tell them, now, by God, you got to do this and you got to do that and so forth. They belong to us, and I think they're in a bad situation. You can imagine their own people pulling them in certain directions and we giving them orders to do. It's impossible. And I hope that we can give them all laissez-passer to get out of the country when we leave, if we leave, because I think they will be on borrowed time because that's the way this is. I remember after World War II, what happened to the French who collaborated with the Germans and the Vichy government after World War II. They pay a price. Some may be very patriotic. They are trying to help their government, but it's a very heavy price to pay. And a lot of the guards and so forth, I know, wear masks because they don't want to be identified. Do you know that thousands of Iraqis flee their own country every week? They go to Jordan, Syria, if they have enough money to pay the customs and bribe their way through, because they want to live, because they want their families to live. They're in camps and so forth. We say we don't talk to these people. We won't talk to the Syrians. They have thousands of Iraqis that they're helping to feed and so forth. And that goes for Jordan, too. Who are we? What is this?
Here in the corner.
You mentioned the war in Iraq being illegal, and I was wondering why no one's really been disciplined for committing such a horrible crime.
The question is, if the war in Iraq is illegal, why has no one been disciplined for this?
Why has no one been disciplined?
Yes, no accountability.
Who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? Who's going to tell the United States you're wrong? A lot of countries have. Actually, an American is not exactly worshipped anymore at our shrine. Anywhere we go, we're despised. We used to have a halo. We were on a pedestal. We were everything they aspired to. We represented the best of mankind. And we've lost that temporarily.
Here in the corner.
You mentioned your most favorite president. Dare I ask the obvious question, who your least favorite president is?
The question is, who's your least favorite president?
Yes.
Here in the balcony.
I want everybody, I just think that it's the greatest honor that can come to anyone to be president. And it seems to me that's the top of the mark. Do the right thing.
Ms. Thomas, I saw you last year chasing Stephen Colbert at the Washington Correspondents' dinner. Did you ever catch him?
The question was, did you ever catch Stephen Colbert at the White House Correspondents' dinner?
No. I made the mistake of laughing at his jokes, and he thought that would be the way the audience would respond. But the reporters thought they had to be polite to the president, and so they gave him kind of almost a silent treatment. In retrospect, they realized that he was very funny, but they were afraid to laugh because the president was there.
Here in the balcony.
Ms. Thomas, you previously mentioned how former President Carter was so well respected that he's called upon to arbitrate disputes around the world. Were you surprised at the firestorm of criticism of him over his book likening Israel's treatment of the Palestinians to apartheid? And was he accurate in that analysis?
Were you surprised by the criticism of President Carter's recent book regarding equating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as apartheid, and do you agree with that assessment?
I haven't read the book. I should have read the book. I've certainly read the reviews. No, I'm never surprised because Arabs don't get any kind of a break in this country. They just don't. And I just think that anyone who defends them is always demonized.
Amen.
The last question here.
I always thought the most patriotic thing was to change your country for the better and for the people. So being a young person and seeing as how it's mostly our country and we can make the most change, other than the obvious, like war in Iraq, answers, what can we as young people do to better our country for ourselves and further generations?
What advice do you have for younger generations in terms of improving the country and making better the situation that we've been discussing?
Read the Constitution. Make the candidates live up to their promises, and don't vote for anyone who doesn't want to make this a better world, who doesn't see what has happened to us. Universal health care, single payer, education, welfare, housing, shelter, medicine. I mean, what is this? Who are these people? Why aren't we helping each other? I just think this whole business that if you help your fellow man, you're wrong. Government should do for people what they can't do for themselves. And we are our brother's keeper. I think that there are so many things that have to be rectified. You see it with your very eyes everywhere you go in this country. Something is wrong. Plus the fact that we've lost our soul, we've lost our spirit as a people. And I want to get it back, and I think we can if you do the right thing. We have to raise our esteem in the world, and we have to know, I mean, we did so many good things in the past, and we can be that again. We represented the best of mankind.
Thank you very much.